Do they just hire anyone these days? The words rolled off Jonathan Pierce's tongue like venom. The entire restaurant went quiet. He sat there in his navy blue suit, gold cufflinks flashing as he inspected his sleeve, now stained with red wine. Across from him stood Maya, a young black waitress clutching an empty glass, her face pale with shock. It had been an accident, a simple slip of her hand, but to Jonathan it was an unforgivable offense. "Look at this," he scoffed, lifting his arm so his friends could see. "Some people just don't belong in places like this." The table of investors burst into laughter. One of them added, "Guess they're just hiring from anywhere now." Maya swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" He cut her off with a raised hand. "Just don't talk. You've done enough already." The laughter grew louder. Phones were lifted. Someone even filmed. Maya's chest tightened, but she stayed composed, forcing herself to nod before stepping back. The humiliation stung deeper than the wine on his sleeve. To Jonathan, she was invisible. To everyone else, she was just another mistake. But fate had other plans. Before the night was over, this same waitress, the one everyone laughed at, would be the only person standing between Jonathan's son and death itself. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'll be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let's begin. The laughter in the restaurant lingered longer than it should have. It wasn't the cheerful kind that filled the air at birthdays or celebrations. It was the cold, mocking kind that people used to remind others of their place. Maya stood frozen, the empty glass still trembling slightly in her hand. Her reflection flickered against the glossy surface of the marble table, small, insignificant next to the billionaire who had just humiliated her. She forced herself to lower the glass, slowly, her voice barely steady as she said again, "I'm truly sorry, sir." Jonathan didn't respond. He was too busy brushing invisible dust off his sleeve, even though the deep stain of red wine had already set. His jaw flexed once, then twice. The silent performance of a man too powerful to forgive small mistakes. Across the table, the three investors chuckled between themselves. They were all dressed alike, black suits, silver watches, and the kind of confidence that came from numbers printed with too many zeros. One of them leaned toward Jonathan and whispered, loud enough for Maya to hear, "You're right, John. Standards are dropping these days." Jonathan smirked, not even trying to hide it. "That's why we build empires," he said smoothly, "to remind the world what real excellence looks like." Their laughter returned, echoing off the tall glass walls of the restaurant. Several diners glanced over but quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. The restaurant wasn't the kind of place where waitresses were defended. It was the kind of place where people like Jonathan Pierce were treated like kings. Maya swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Her hands ached from holding the tray so tightly. Every instinct screamed for her to run to the back and hide, but she refused to move until she'd finished the job properly. Quietly, she placed a napkin by the corner of the table and whispered, "I can bring a replacement drink if you'd like." Jonathan didn't look up. "I think we're done here," he said coldly. "You've already served enough." It wasn't just rejection. It was dismissal. The kind that came with the power to erase someone's dignity with a single sentence. Maya nodded, barely managing to keep her composure. "Of course, sir." She stepped back, steady, careful not to let the tremor in her hands show. As she turned away, one of the investors muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." The others laughed again, softer this time, but still cruel. The sound followed her like an echo. Behind the counter, the soft clinking of glasses mixed with whispers. "Did you see that?" one waitress murmured. He didn't have to talk to her like that. "Jonathan Pierce, isn't that the same billionaire who donated to that hospital last month?" "Yeah, but you know these people. Money makes them forget how to be human." Maya didn't say a word. She just exhaled, steady and quiet, then went back to wiping the counter. It wasn't the first time someone had looked at her and seen less, and she doubted it would be the last. But what stung wasn't his words. It was how easily everyone accepted them. She had worked here for 2 years. She'd seen birthdays, proposals, tears, and laughter. But she had never felt smaller than she did at that moment. Her mind replayed his words. Do they just hire anyone these days? Over and over until it was all she could hear. Still, she smiled when the next customer called. She always smiled, because sometimes kindness was the only dignity she had left to give. At the far end of the restaurant, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, pride swelling as the investors praised his cool head and decisive attitude. He liked that, being admired, being in control. The world, in his eyes, was a stage where he always stood at the center. Everyone else was just background noise. Gentlemen, he said, adjusting his cufflinks, the new acquisition is only the beginning. By next quarter, we'll triple our returns. That's what happens when you set standards. One of the men lifted his glass. To standards, he said with a grin. They toasted. The glasses clinked, the laughter returned. But for the first time, Jonathan's son didn't join in. Lucas Pierce sat quietly beside his father, his small hands folded neatly on his lap. At 7 years old, he didn't understand corporate strategy or investment terms, but he understood tone. And the one his father used with Maya had made his stomach twist. He leaned toward Jonathan and whispered, "Dad." She said sorry. Jonathan didn't look at him. He just sipped his wine. "She made a mess, son. You don't get rewarded for carelessness." Lucas frowned. "But you laughed at her." Jonathan's eyes flicked to his son, the way a man might look at a mosquito near his ear. "You'll understand when you're older." Lucas looked down at his plate, quietly. But he didn't touch his food again. Behind the scenes, Maya's co-workers tried to cheer her up. "Don't let it get to you," said Rosa, the senior waitress, patting her shoulder. "People like that think money buys manners. It doesn't." Maya smiled faintly. "I know, I just wish I hadn't spilled that drink." "You were nervous," Rosa said. "Anyone would be, serving him. That man's face looks like it's never smiled." Maya chuckled softly. "I guess I just learned what it feels like to be invisible." Rosa tilted her head. "You're not invisible. You're stronger than that. And karma, well, it has a way of teaching people lessons." Maya nodded, though she didn't believe in karma as much as she believed in grace. Her grandmother used to say, "When life hands you humiliation, wear it like armor, not shame." Maybe that was what she was doing now, trying to stay graceful in a world that loved to test her. A little later, the restaurant's mood had shifted. The music played softer, the chatter quieter, but the tension from earlier still lingered in the air like a ghost. People avoided looking at Maya for too long, unsure whether to pity her or forget her. Jonathan, on the other hand, was in full control again. He was laughing, talking business, smiling for the cameras some reporters had set up near the entrance. The wine stain on his sleeve had dried into a dark patch, but he wore it like it didn't exist. He didn't see Maya glance his way once, not out of anger, but reflection. To her, he wasn't a monster, just another man too, lost in his own pride to see humanity standing right in front of him. She quietly continued serving other tables, her movements calm, professional, graceful. Her dignity, though bruised, was still intact. But something strange began to stir inside the room. A quiet tension no one could name. As if the universe itself had paused, watching the scene play out. Jonathan's laughter, the investor's smugness, the quiet ache in Maya's chest. It all existed in the same air, like different notes in a single melody about to change key. The night wasn't over, not even close. Maya moved toward the kitchen, pausing for a moment near the edge of Jonathan's table. She glanced briefly at Lucas, who caught her eye and offered a small, shy smile, the kind that children gave when they understood something adults didn't. She smiled back gently, before disappearing behind the kitchen door. Jonathan didn't notice. But fate did, because sometimes destiny doesn't walk in with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it waits quietly in the corner of a restaurant, watching pride take its final breath before kindness revives it. And in that quiet moment, as the clock ticked, the laughter faded, and the echoes of cruelty hung in the air, the universe prepared its lesson. Jonathan Pierce, the man who thought perfection was power, was about to learn that true grace often wears an apron and carries a tray. The restaurant had begun to quiet down, the sound of silverware against porcelain fading into soft murmurs. Dinner was nearly over, and the investors were deep in conversation, speaking in half-sentences about profits, mergers, and numbers that made ordinary people dizzy. Jonathan Pierce leaned back, and the air of a man who believed he had already conquered the evening. His suit still bore the faint shadow of red wine, but his pride remained spotless, or so he thought. Lucas, his 7-year-old son, sat silently beside him, his plate nearly untouched. The boy's gaze wandered to the restaurant's large glass windows, where city lights danced like tiny stars. "Dad," he whispered softly, "can I go see the fountain?" Jonathan waved a hand, still talking to one of the investors. "Yes, but don't go too far, Lucas." Lucas smiled faintly, sliding out of his chair. He made his way toward the decorative fountain in the center of the restaurant, a small marble piece surrounded by flowers and golden light. The kind of thing adults admired for design and children loved for magic. Across the room, Maya carried a tray of desserts to a different table. Her movements were calm, precise, professional, every action done with the quiet focus of someone who had learned to keep her emotions under control. But her mind wasn't quiet, not after what had happened earlier. She had replayed the billionaire's words again and again, each one cutting deeper than the last. Still she refused to let it show. She served, she smiled, she moved gracefully, because dignity wasn't something anyone could take from her without permission. Then it happened. A sudden gasp broke through the soft hum of the restaurant. Then another. Maya turned instinctively, her eyes scanning the room. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing, just the image of Jonathan rising abruptly from his chair, his face drained of color. "Lucas!" His voice cracked, sharp and panicked. "Lucas!" Maya's heart stopped for a moment. The boy was on the floor, his small hands clutched his throat, his face turning red, eyes wide with terror. He was choking. For a split second, no one moved. Not the investors, not the diners, not even Jonathan. The billionaire's usual confidence vanished, replaced by pure, frozen fear. He shouted again, louder this time, "Somebody help him! Somebody do something!" But no one did. The investors stood helplessly, their hands half raised, their eyes darting between Jonathan and the boy. The restaurant manager ran toward them, stammering, "We've called 911, sir." Maya didn't think. She just moved. The tray in her hands clattered to the floor, plates shattering as she sprinted across the room. The sound of her shoes echoed off the marble as she dropped to her knees beside Lucas. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "It's okay? I've got you?" Jonathan knelt too, his hands trembling. "He's choking! Oh God, he can't breathe!" "Please, step back," Maya said quickly. "I know what to do." For a second, Jonathan just stared at her, stunned that the woman he'd humiliated earlier was now the only one taking control. But the look in her eyes, steady, sure, snapped him out of his panic. He moved aside. Maya positioned herself behind the boy, wrapping her arms around his small body. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "Stay with me." She pressed her fists below his ribcage and thrust upward, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. She repeated, firmer now. "Breathe, Lucas. You can do this." On the 4th thrust, a small chunk of food flew from the boy's mouth, landing on the floor. Lucas gasped, coughing violently, sucking in air. The restaurant erupted, gasps, cries, and the sound of someone clapping their hands over their mouth in shock. Jonathan froze. watching as Maya held his son upright, her hand gently rubbing his back. "It's okay," she soothed. "You're safe now. You're okay." But the boy was still weak, his breathing ragged. His little chest rose and fell unevenly. "He needs oxygen," Maya said quickly, turning toward the stunned men. "Call 911 now!" One of the investors fumbled for his phone. "I already did. They're on the way." Maya stayed beside Lucas, holding him upright. She gently loosened his collar and rubbed his back as he coughed, keeping him conscious. Her hands shook slightly now, adrenaline fading into fear. Jonathan knelt beside her, his voice trembling. Is he going to be all right?" Maya didn't look at him. She just nodded, focused entirely on the boy. "He's breathing again. That's good. He just needs to stay calm until paramedics arrive." The crowd around them watched in stunned silence. The same people who had laughed moments ago now stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. The billionaire who had mocked the waitress was now helpless, relying on her to keep his son alive. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the night. 2 paramedics burst through the door with a stretcher, guided by the restaurant manager. Maya stepped back slightly to give them space, her hands stained with Lucas's tears and the remnants of spilled dessert from her uniform. "He choked on food," she explained quickly. "He was unconscious for a few seconds, but I cleared his airway. He's breathing again, though still weak." The paramedics nodded, working efficiently. One of them smiled at her briefly. "You did great, miss. You probably saved his life." Jonathan's throat tightened. He looked at Maya, really looked at her for the first time, not as a waitress, not as someone beneath him, but as a person. As the paramedics lifted Lucas onto the stretcher, the boy reached out a tiny hand toward Maya. "Thank you," he whispered. Her composure cracked. She smiled through wet eyes and gently squeezed his hand. "Be strong, okay? You'll be just fine." Then they were gone, wheels rolling out the door, red and blue lights flashing beyond the glass. The restaurant was dead silent. One of the investors finally muttered, almost to himself, "She saved him?" Jonathan turned toward Maya, his face drained of color and pride. His voice was quiet now, broken even. I don't know what to say." Maya just nodded, her voice soft but steady. "Just be there for him, sir." That's what matters. Then she walked away, back toward the kitchen, stepping carefully over the shattered glass she'd left behind. That night, Jonathan didn't touch his dessert. He didn't talk about the deal. He didn't even notice the eyes following him as he left the restaurant. For the first time in a long time, he felt small, because no amount of money could buy what that young woman had just given him. A second chance to be a father. Before we continue, my beautiful family, if you're still watching right now, it means you're truly feeling this story. So please, take a second to hit subscribe and drop a little heart in the comments. Every comment, every reaction, and every new subscriber pushes me to bring you even more emotional stories. Deeper, stronger, and more inspiring than before. Now, let's get back to the story. The hospital was quiet except for the steady beep-beep of the heart monitor. Cold fluorescent lights hummed above, painting the room in shades of white and remorse. Jonathan Pierce sat beside his son's bed, elbows on his knees, his perfectly tailored suit now wrinkled, his tie loosened. The man who once filled boardrooms with confidence now looked like a ghost of himself. Beside him, little Lucas slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of safety. Every breath the boy took was a reminder of what Jonathan almost lost, and of who had saved him. He'd replayed the moment 100 times in his head, the spilled wine, the laughter, his own cruel voice echoing in front of strangers. Do they just hire anyone these days? Those words haunted him now. He had thrown them like daggers, without thinking, without care, and yet the person he'd cut the deepest had been the one who'd saved his world. Every time he blinked, he saw Maya's face, calm, focused, fearless. The woman he mocked had kept her dignity while he lost his humanity. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. The investors had texted to check on him earlier, but he didn't reply. Deals and numbers felt meaningless now. What did power matter if you couldn't respect the people around you? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He looked up and froze. Standing at the doorway, in her black and white uniform, was Maya. She looked hesitant, her hands clasped together, but her eyes were warm. "Mr. Pierce," she said quietly, stepping in. "I just came to see how Lucas was doing." Jonathan stood so quickly his chair nearly fell back. He's stable," he managed to say. "The doctors say he'll be fine, thanks to you." Maya smiled faintly. "That's good to hear. He's a brave boy." There was a long pause between them. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with everything Jonathan wanted to say but couldn't find the words for. Finally he exhaled. "I don't deserve your kindness." Maya's eyes softened. "You don't need to deserve it." She took a step closer, her voice gentle but steady. "Sometimes people just need it." Her words cut through him sharper than any insult could. Jonathan looked away, swallowing hard. "I treated you horribly, in front of everyone. You had every right to walk away, to let someone else help, but you didn't." "I didn't do it for you," Maya said, simply. "I did it because a child needed help." That truth stung and humbled him. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. "I've spent years thinking success gave me the right to look down on people. Tonight proved I was wrong." Maya gave a small, understanding smile. "It's never too late to look up instead." For a moment the room was still. The heart monitor beeped softly. Lucas shifted in his sleep, and somewhere down the hall, a nurse's shoes clicked faintly on the tile. Jonathan finally looked back at her. "I'll make things right, not just with you, but with the people I've disrespected along the way." Maya nodded. "That's between you and your heart, Mr. Pierce." She turned to leave, but Jonathan stopped her softly. "Maya." She looked back. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For saving my son, for reminding me what real worth looks like." Maya gave him a small, genuine smile. "Take care of him, that's all the thanks I need." And with that, she left as quietly as she'd entered. Jonathan stood by the window, watching her walk down the hall until she disappeared from sight. Then he looked back at his son, sleeping peacefully, and realized something he'd never understood before. Money could build empires, but kindness saved souls. A week passed, but the moment never left him. No deal, no meeting, no boardroom victory could erase the memory of that night, the sound of laughter, the wine-stained suit, and the woman he humiliated who still chose compassion over pride. Jonathan Pierce, the man once known for his arrogance, walked into the same restaurant again. At the corner of the dining room, Maya was arranging flowers on a table. She froze when she saw him. For a moment, their eyes met, hers guarded, his humble. The memory of humiliation lingered, but so did something deeper. Understanding. Jonathan walked up slowly, every step heavy with meaning. The restaurant fell silent. Even the soft jazz in the background seemed to fade. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly. "I owe you an apology. And more than that, a thank you." Maya blinked, unsure what to say. He turned to the crowd, waiters, managers, and diners who had started gathering, curious. "I came here a week ago," he began, his voice low but firm. "And I made a fool of myself, not because of spilled wine, but because of pride." He paused, glancing at the same table where he had once sat with the investors. "I thought success made me better than others. I thought I could measure worth in money, in clothes, in power. But then my son—" His voice faltered for a moment. "My son's life was hanging by a thread, and the only person who acted was the same woman I'd mocked." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Phones came out again, but this time not to capture a scandal, only a moment of truth. Jonathan continued, eyes soft but sincere. She didn't hesitate. She didn't care who I was or what I said. She cared about saving a child. That's something no amount of money can ever buy. He looked directly at Maya. Sometimes it takes losing control, he said softly, to understand respect. Maya swallowed, emotion filling her chest. She didn't expect this, not in front of everyone. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the flowers down, unsure if she should speak. The restaurant owner, a kind, middle-aged man who had witnessed everything that night, stepped forward. "Mr. Pierce, it takes courage to come back here, but I think there's someone else who deserves recognition today." He turned toward Maya, smiling. "Maya, for your calm, bravery, and grace under pressure, I'm promoting you to head server, effective immediately." The restaurant broke into applause. Maya covered her mouth in disbelief, tears glistening in her eyes. She hadn't asked for any of this. She just did what was right. Jonathan clapped too, genuinely this time. "That's the least she deserves," he said. Then turning to the manager, he added, "And I'd like to do something as well." He reached into his pocket and handed over a check. "This," he explained, "is for a scholarship fund for waitresses, service workers, anyone chasing a dream while serving others. Name it after her, the Maya Thompson Scholarship for Kindness and Excellence." The room erupted in gasps. Even Maya stood frozen, speechless. Jonathan smiled faintly, looking around at the crowd. "You see, I mocked her for a mistake. But she saved my son without hesitation. And that night, I learned something money can't teach." He took a deep breath, his voice dropping to a sincere whisper. "The real class isn't measured by money, but by heart." The applause that followed wasn't just for Maya, it was for humanity itself. Phones recorded, not to shame, but to share hope. Within hours, the video went viral across social media. Headlines read, "Billionaire publicly apologizes to waitress who saved his son's life." The kindness that humbled a billionaire. Maya's story spread far beyond that restaurant. She received letters, calls, even job offers, but she stayed. When asked why, she said simply, "Because here's where the lesson began." Later that evening, as Jonathan and Lucas walked out together, the boy tugged at his father's hand. "Daddy?" he asked softly. "Yes, buddy?" "Can we come here again next week to see Miss Maya?" Jonathan smiled, a tear forming in his eye. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we'll come back, but next time I'm the one leaving the tip." They both laughed, a sound lighter than it had been in years. That night, Maya stood by the window after her shift, watching the city lights shimmer. For her, it wasn't about recognition or reward. It was about dignity, proving that kindness never goes unnoticed, even in a world that often confuses wealth with worth. And somewhere out there, a man who once lived by pride now lived by gratitude. He mocked her for a mistake. She saved his son without hesitation. And that day, everyone in that restaurant learned the real class isn't measured by money but by heart. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.